Chapter 6. The darkness of the cave was heavy and suffocating. Outside, the black wolves continued to snarl and scratch at the entrance. Inside, Thomas whimpered as Captain Gideon pressed the rusty cutlass tighter against his throat. Constance forced her breath to slow down. Her mind raced, remembering the sweet, intoxicating liquid they had drunk from the pitcher plants just an hour before. It had given her a massive burst of energy. She looked at the mad pirate, whose eyes shifted wildly. In the dim candlelight, he was desperate, starving, and clearly unhinged. "Our ship is gone," Constance said, her voice steady and loud enough to cut through the snarling of the wolves outside. "It sank in the storm. We are the only survivors." Gideon's face twisted in rage. "Liar! You wash ashore in a fine lifeboat, and you expect the scourge of the Atlantic to believe you have no vessel? I'll slide this blade right through his neck if you don't give me coordinates." "I am telling the truth," Constance argued, taking a cautious half-step forward. "But we found something else on the beach. A cache of old Spanish silver half buried near the wrecks. We couldn't carry it all." The word silver hit the mad pirate like a physical blow. His bloodshot eyes widened, and the hand holding the cutlass trembled with sudden greed. "Silver? Spanish coin?" "Yes," Constance lied smoothly, keeping her eyes locked on his. "But the wolves chased us away from it. If you kill my brother, I will never show you where it is hidden, and you will die on this island alone." Gideon hesitated, his gaze darting between Constance and the terrifying sounds of the wolves digging at the cave mouth. "You think you can trick me, girl? Listen to them," Constance urged, pointing toward the entrance. "The wolves are hungry. If you use your sword to clear a path, we can lead you straight to the beach. The silver is yours." Greed completely overtook the pirate's caution. He roughly shoved Thomas away, sending the boy tumbling to the dirt floor next to Constance. Gideon advanced toward the narrow crevice of the cave mouth, raising his cutlass. "If you are lying, I will feed your bones to the sharks. Stand back." As Gideon turned his back to shove his way out and face the wolves, Constance grabbed Thomas by the hand. They didn't follow the pirate toward the entrance. Instead, Constance pulled her brother backward, deeper into the pitch-black, unexplored tunnels of the cavern, fleeing into the unknown. Chapter 7. The pitch-black tunnels of the cave felt endless, but Constance and Thomas pressed on, keeping one hand on the cold, damp stone walls. Behind them, the muffled sounds of Captain Gideon's furious shouts and the snarling of the wolves slowly faded into nothingness. "Constance, look," Thomas whispered, pointing ahead. A tiny pinprick of natural light pierced the gloom. They hurried toward it, scrambling up a steep incline of loose gravel, until they burst out of a hidden exit on the opposite side of the mountain. The fresh air hit them, but they didn't stop to rest. Looming directly above them was the island's highest peak, a jagged volcanic ridge that overlooked the entire Atlantic Ocean. "If we want to be saved, we have to get up there," Constance said, her legs aching as she pointed toward the summit. "It's the only way a passing ship will ever see us." The climb was brutal. The tropical sun beat down on them mercilessly, and the volcanic rock tore at their hands and boots. Along the ridge, Constance noticed patches of dried, black vegetation clinging to the stone. It was dried oil kelp, washed up from ancient storms and baked crisp by the sun. When she touched it, a thick, greasy residue stained her fingers. "Thomas, gather as much of this dried kelp as you can carry," she instructed, her eyes lighting up with hope. It's full of natural oils. If we burn it, the smoke will be thick and bright. They reached the rocky summit just as the afternoon began to fade. Together, they piled the oily kelp high into a massive mound. Thomas reached into his waistcoat pocket and pulled out his prized possession, a small piece of colonial flint he had saved from the sea venture. "I don't have steel to strike it against," Thomas said, his voice dropping as he looked around the bare rock. "Use your pocket knife," Constance said, kneeling beside the pile. "Strike the back of the blade against the flint. Hurry, before Gideon finds us." Thomas gripped the flint tightly. He struck the back of his knife against the stone. Sparks flew, but missed the dry kelp. He struck it again, harder this time. A brilliant spark landed directly in the center of the oily pile. A tiny wisp of white smoke appeared, followed by a sudden, violent whoosh. The oily kelp caught fire instantly. Instead of normal gray smoke, the chemical properties of the sun-baked sea kelp created a towering, massive plume of bright, unnatural purple smoke that shot straight into the clear blue sky. It was a beacon that could be seen for miles across the open ocean. Chapter 8. The purple smoke billowed into the afternoon sky like a giant, twisting ribbon. Constance and Thomas stood on the windy peak, watching the beacon drift across the ocean. Their celebration was cut short by a furious roar from the ridge below. "You miserable little thieves." Captain Gideon burst from the jungle trail. His ragged coat was torn to shreds. His face was bleeding from wolf scratches, and his cutlass gleamed under the sun. He lunged up the final rocky slope, his mad eyes locked onto Thomas. "You tricked me. There was no silver. I'll take your heads for this." Thomas scrambled backward, tripping over a loose stone. Constance bolted forward, grabbing a heavy charred branch from the edge of the signal fire. She swung it with all her might, striking the pirate's rusted blade. The impact sent a jar of pain up her arms, but it bought Thomas enough time to roll out of the way. "Run, Thomas! Down the other side!" Constance screamed, dropping the branch as Gideon swung his sword in a wild, horizontal arc that barely missed her shoulder. They scrambled down the steep eastern face of the mountain, slipping and sliding over loose gravel. Gideon pursued them relentlessly, his heavy boots thudding against the stone. The siblings burst out onto the ash-gray beach where they had first washed ashore, their lungs burning, their bodies entirely exhausted. They were cornered. The open ocean was behind them, and the mad pirate blocked the jungle exit. Nowhere left to run. Gideon sneered, raising his cutlass as he stepped onto the sand. Suddenly, a loud, thunderous crack echoed across the bay. A musket ball struck the sand inches from Gideon's feet, sending up a spray of gray grit. Gideon froze, spinning around. Cutting through the coastal surf was a large wooden longboat. 6 armed men in clean, navy blue colonial coats were rowing hard toward the beach. Standing at the bow, holding a smoking flintlock pistol and wearing a familiar black tricorn hat, was a rugged, broad-shouldered man with a graying beard, smelled bow. "Bartholomew!" Thomas shrieked, tears finally breaking through the dirt on his face. "Step away from the children, you sea rat!" Uncle Bartholomew roared, drawing a heavy steel saber and leaping out of the longboat into the knee-deep water. The armed rescue crew surged ashore behind him, muskets leveled. Realizing he was completely outmatched, Captain Gideon dropped his rusted cutlass into the wet sand, threw his hands into the air, and fell to his knees in Defeat Chapter 9. The heavy wooden timbers of the Audacious felt wonderfully solid beneath Constance's bare, scratched feet. Wrapped in warm woolen blankets and sipping bowls of hot, salty broth, the siblings sat on the sun-drenched deck as the island faded into a tiny speck on the horizon. Captain Gideon sat chained to the mainmast in the distance, glaring at the floorboards. Uncle Bartholomew knelt down in front of them, his rugged face softening as he placed his heavy hands on their shoulders. "You two are the bravest souls I've ever met," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "To survive that treacherous island alone. Your grandfather would have been proud." "Uncle Bartholomew," Thomas said, his hands trembling as he set his empty bowl down. "Our ship, the Sea Venture, it sank in the fog. We saw the hull split. Our mother and father—" He couldn't finish the sentence, a sob catching in his throat. Constance held her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs as she stared at her uncle's eyes, terrified of the answer. Bartholomew smiled, a warm, genuine grin that instantly washed away the cold dread in Constance's chest. "They are alive, Thomas. Both of them." Constance gasped, a tear finally sliding down her cheek. The wave damaged the Sea Venture severely. "Yes," Uncle Bartholomew explained, wiping a smudge of ash from Constance's forehead. "But the crew managed to patch the leak and limp into the harbor at Williamsburg, Virginia, 4 days ago. Your mother and father were devastated. They thought the sea had taken you when your lifeboat broke away. They begged me to take my cutter and search every reef along the coast." He stood up, pointing toward the west, where the sun was beginning to dip below the ocean line. "We are making full sail. By tomorrow morning, you will be off this ship and back in their arms." Constance wrapped her arm around Thomas, pulling him close as they looked out at the vast, open Atlantic. The nightmare of the storm, the wolves, and the mad pirate was finally over. Ahead of them lay the shores of the new world and a family that was waiting to be made whole again. Chapter 10. 5 years later, the bustling docks of Williamsburg, Virginia, hummed with the sound of hammers, rolling carriages, and merchant shouting. Standing proudly before a large wooden storefront with a painted sign reading, "The Penrose Frontier," outfitting company stood Constance and Thomas. They were no longer the helpless, terrified children who had washed ashore on the island of thorns. The trauma of their survival had become the foundation of their great success. Having outsmarted wolves, mudslides, and mad pirates, the siblings possessed a deep, unparalleled knowledge of wilderness survival that ordinary colonists desperately needed as they pushed into the uncharted western frontier. Inside the shop, the air smelled of rich cedar wood, oiled leather, and gunpowder. Together with their father, who managed the finances, the siblings had built the most successful outfitting business in the colonies. Thomas, now 15, was the company's chief scout. Using the sharp eyes and tracking skills he developed on the island, he drew highly accurate, custom topographical maps of the Appalachian wilderness. He also designed lightweight, durable leather packs that wouldn't tear in dense brush, modeled after the survival gear they had rigged from shipwrecked timber. Constance, 16, was the brilliant mastermind behind the trading and logistics. She managed the supply lines, negotiated with trappers, and had invented a specialized line of compact, sun-baked travel provisions, inspired by the sweet liquid of the island's pitcher plants. Her lightweight rations provided pioneers with instant energy and long-lasting nutrition on the trail. As the sun began to set over the bustling Virginia colony, a group of eager pioneers walked into the shop, seeking gear for a long journey into the deep woods. Thomas smiled, pulling out one of his custom maps, while Constance stepped forward to count the silver coin. They had lost their old life in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, but on a dangerous, forgotten island, they had discovered their true strength. They were no longer just survivors of the old world. They were the true trailblazers of the new one.